pass a very important great filter. I think we need to be a multi-planet species. This may sound somewhat esoteric to a lot of people, but eventually, given enough time, this is something the Earth is likely to experience some calamity. That could be something that humans do to themselves, or an external event like happened to the dinosaurs. But a bit of, eventually, and if none of that happens, and somehow magically we keep going, then the sun is gradually expanding, and will engulf the Earth, and probably Earth gets too hot for life in about 500 million years. It's a long time, but that's only 10% longer than Earth has been around. And so if you think about the current situation, it's really remarkable, and kind of hard to believe, but Earth's been around 4.5 billion years, and this is the first time in 4.5 billion years that it's been possible to extend life beyond Earth. And that window of opportunity may be open for a long time, and I hope it is, but it also may be open for a short time. And we should, I think it was wise for us to act quickly while the window is open, just in case it closes. I mean, it's important to think of these things and just, think of things like probabilities, not certainties. There's a probability that something bad will happen on Earth. I think most likely the future will be good. But there's let's say for argument's sake, a 1% chance per century of a civilization ending event. That was Stephen Hawking's estimate. I think he might be right about that. So then, we should basically think of this being a multi-planet species is like taking out insurance for life itself. Life insurance for life. We can bring the creatures from, plants and animals from Earth to Mars and breathe life into the planet. And have a second planet with life. That would be great. They can't bring themselves there, so if we don't bring them to Mars, then they will just for sure all die when the sun expands anyway, and then that'll be it. The key threshold, the great filter will have been passed when the city on Mars can survive even if the spaceships from Earth stop coming for any reason. Doesn't matter what the reason is, but if they stop coming for any reason, will it die out or will it not? So we're going to get a Mars city to the point where it's self-sustaining. I'm not sure this will really happen in my lifetime, but I hope to see it at least have a lot of momentum. And then you could say, okay, what is the minimum tonnage necessary to have a self-sustaining city? And there's a lot of uncertainty about this. So you could say, I don't know, it's probably at least 1 million tons. Because you have to set up a lot of infrastructure on Mars. Like I said, you can't be missing anything that, in order to be self-sustaining, you can't be missing. You need, semiconductor fabs. You need iron ore refineries. You need lots of things. And Mars is not super hospitable. It's the least inhospitable planet, but it's definitely a fixer-upper of a planet. You can only move at the speed of light through space, but if you can make space itself move, that's warping space. Space is capable of moving faster than the speed of light. Like the universe in the Big Bang, the universe expanded at much more than the speed of light, by a lot.
Yeah.
But if this is possible, the amount of energy required to warp space is so gigantic, it boggles the mind. Right now, the Falcon 9 is the only reusable rocket out there. But the booster comes back and lands. I'm sure you've seen the videos, and we get the nose cone fairing back, but we do not get the upper stage back. So that means that we have a minimum cost of building an upper stage. You can think of a two-stage rocket of sort of two airplanes, a big airplane and a small airplane. And we get the big airplane back, but not the small airplane. And so it still costs a lot, so that upper stage is, at least $10 million. And then the degree of the booster is not as rapidly and completely reusable as we'd like, nor are the fairings. So, our kind of minimum marginal cost, not counting overhead per flight, is on the order of $15 to $20 million, maybe. That's extremely good it's by far better than any rocket ever in history. But with full and rapid reusability, we can reduce the cost per ton to orbit by a factor of 100. But just think of it like imagine if you had an aircraft or something, or a car, and if you had to buy a new car every time you went for a drive, it would be very expensive. It'd be silly, frankly. Mm-hmm. But you just refuel the car or recharge the car, and that's makes your trip like 1,000 times cheaper. So it's the same for rockets. It's very difficult to make this complex machine that can go to orbit, and so if you cannot reuse it and have to throw even any significant part of it away, that massively increases the cost. So, Starship in theory could do a cost per launch of like $1 million, maybe $2 million or something like that, and put over 100 tons in orbit, which is crazy.
Oh, well, I've thought for at least 10 years that the biggest problem in 50 years will be that there's just not enough people. The population collapse in developed countries is precipitous, right? It's like we fall off a cliff. I worked on a UN committee, it's got to be 10 years ago now, to help draft the UN Secretary General's report on sustainable economic development. And so I looked at all sorts of things like that. I was very curious, for example, because people have been beating the overpopulation drum since, it really kicked in the 1960s, because there were dire predictions. By the year 2000, the Club of Rome came out and said, there'll be riots and mass starvation and mass movement of migrants, and because there's too many people on the planet. And that just didn't happen at all. It wasn't just wrong, it was anti-true. It was absolutely wrong. What happened instead was that everyone got way richer, and the bottom section of the population in terms of economic distribution got lifted out of poverty. Inequality still exists, but that's that power law phenomenon we already talked about. Not that that's trivial, it's just unbelievably difficult to determine what to do with. There are solutions, but certainly getting rid of capitalism isn't the solution. And so I looked at population trends and first of all found, not that this is an act of genius or anything, that as soon as you educate women, the size of family shrinks precipitously, like below replacement. And that's partly because women have other options. I mean, all the countries in the West are way below replacement. Korea's way below replacement. South Korea, Japan, way below replacement. Yeah, I think Nigeria will have more people in it than China by the end of the century. So, yeah. And Musk, he's a far-looking man, and so he's looking around the apocalyptic corner, let's say. We're running out of people. And what that means, of course, is that you run out of young people, right? You don't run out of old people first, because everyone who is here now is going to be 30 years older in 30 years. And it'll be young people we don't have enough of. And of course, young people are the ones who do the innovation and are going to do most of the heavy lifting, etc. And so there's going to be a terrible shortage of young people. Yeah, and this idea that the planet has too many people on it, so what do you mean too many people? Exactly. And what do you mean the planet? And what do you propose to do about that exactly? Or should we do something a little more dramatic? Maybe we'll just shame people out of having children. And I've seen people do that. Literally, I saw a professor when I was at a TED. There was a number of professors talking to a couple hundred students. And one of the professors, who was an environmentalist activist type, and he got up on stage and shook his finger to the whole young crowd, saying that him and his wife had only decided to have one child, which was, in my opinion, one child too many for him, and told all the young people there if they had a shred of ethical decency that they would severely limit their reproductive potential. And I stood up and said, that I thought that was one of the most appalling things I'd ever heard anyone in academia say to young people, which is really saying something, because they say plenty of appalling things. And it was a very uncomfortable moment, and he huffed off the stage. But, in a frenzy, talking about how you couldn't talk about such things without being pilloried on ethical grounds. And yeah, that's for sure. You come out as emissary of the academic establishment. You tell young people that humanity is so corrupt that they should seriously consider not propagating, because that violates the deepest of ethical norms, and you think that's a good thing and that's your right. And it was just beyond comprehension. It's beyond comprehension, but it's associated with like a deeply rooted existential self-hatred. So yeah, it's unbelievable, and a huge part of it's rooted in this existential shame and horror at the condition of being human, and the fact that life is rife with suffering, and a lot of it's unjustified. And it's a Mephistophelian position. So Mephistopheles was laid out, portrayed in Goethe's Faust. That's the story of a man who sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. It's a story of intellectual pride, and Goethe stands in relationship to German literature in the same manner that Shakespeare stands in relationship to English literature. And Goethe's Mephistopheles says straight out twice in the play, once in the first, there's two books, and once in the first book and once in the second. Goethe has him restated twice. Existence is such a foul thing because of all its suffering, essentially, that it would be better if it was merely annihilated. And that's the Mephistophelian stance. This whole show should just come to a halt. Look at how corrupt people are. Evil reigns everywhere. It's nothing but will to power. We're destroying the planet with our unchecked ambition, all of it rooted in greed and Machiavellianism and jockeying for position. And we're so contemptible that we should just roll up and die. It's unbelievably appalling. It goes all the way down to the bottom of things. That's what's tearing our culture apart, this dispute about the nature of existence at the most fundamental level.